So let me provide some insight on why I am the way I am when it comes to this birth situation and why I go so hard. Because like most things in my life, or the things that y'all see me talk about here on this little blue app, are things that I've experienced, things that I've witnessed. I only talk about the things that I know about. So anything that you may see me being passionate about, you can trust that I've had an experience of sorts. So yeah, I'm just gonna invite a couple people to come and check it out. And okay, yeah. And if I didn't send you an invite and you wanted to see it, my bad. But as always, I will post the video after this live, and y'all can always catch it on my page. But I like to invite people to the live discussion so that we can, y'all can participate in the live conversation. So yeah. Okay. Got some time. My husband took the baby that this story is about to Sequest. So, give me a second. Okay. Hey, y'all. Okay, so first birth story, July 2017. Hey, McClay. Okay, so this is my first labor, first delivery, and I am nowhere near the knowledgeable resource on birth and delivery that I am today. I'm pretty clueless to how it's supposed to work, and generally distrustful of the medical institution, but not distrustful enough to not give birth there. Well, actually, no, I really, really wanted to have a home birth the first go around. But for those of you who don't know, both my husband and I are prior service military, and at the time we lived on a military base, and we were way out in the middle of nowhere. I'm talking like in Southern California, out in the Mojave Desert. Walmart is like an hour away. The nearest Whole Foods is like 3 hours away. We are just out in the middle of the desert, way away from civilization. The nearest town is like 45 minutes, and that's a real hick bum town. You got to drive about 2 hours to get to a real city, and even the expressway was like 45 minutes away, just to give y'all some perspective. So we're just out in the middle of the desert, and I had found a midwife that would be willing to travel to me for the birth. She charged nearly double, a little more than double what the midwives in Sacramento charge. Probably now, and I didn't know at the time, a good price for that sort of thing. But now I guess it's because of the fact that she would have had to come all the way out there. Dang, can y'all hear this little girl and her hiccups? She is loud. But I had found someone that would come to the birth, but the installation that we lived on had informed me that I could not have a home birth. And I inquired, what happens if I accidentally go into labor at home? Like, I just say I wake up and it's like, oh shit, baby's head is coming. And they were like, you could be fined and or incarcerated. There would definitely be an investigation. And given the fact that you've asked this question, it wouldn't look good for you. Okay, well, excuse me for trying to do what nature intended, So I found that out early in pregnancy and just came to terms with having to have a hospital birth. But I knew that there was, a number of things that I wanted to do, despite the fact that I had to birth in the hospital, like a lotus birth. I knew that I wouldn't vaccinate my daughter. These things along these lines. So, and I told my doctor when I was 22 weeks pregnant that we were going to do a lotus birth and that we would not vaccinate. And if they had any problem. He needed to get all of the medical staff on board with my birthing decisions, given that, he may not be the doctor on call when I went into labor. And I said, and I'm open to discussing these things, and I'm open to exploring other options if that's what y'all want me to do. But this is a conversation that we need to have right now. And I said that to be saying it really because I knew that I was doing a lotus birth, and I knew that I wasn't going to vaccinate, but to play the game. I'm like, yeah, we can talk about it. Let's talk about it. But let's talk about it now at this 20-week mark, because I am not going to be prepared to argue with y'all come labor and delivery. I said what I said. Doctor is like, it's cool. That's perfectly fine. Don't worry about it. All right. Now, I was due with my daughter on the 4th of July, 2017, and she was born July 12th, 2017. The doctor, whom had been my primary care provider from my first trimester throughout my entire pregnancy, had scheduled some vacation time for himself for the 4th of July. Now, the thing about the military is you have to put your vacation in early. So this man had he had known as of, baby want the no-nos. He had known as of October that he wouldn't be available for my due date. For 2 weeks surrounding my due date, matter of fact, but he didn't choose to disclose that information with me. I don't know. I feel like that's something you let your patient know. It's like, hey, I see you're due at this time. I'm going to be on vacation at this time. Maybe you want to get another doctor and establish a relationship, get to know somebody else over the course of your pregnancy, because it's highly likely that I won't be there. But he didn't tell me this. I didn't find out that he wasn't going to be there until I was 39 weeks pregnant. So fast forward to this time. And he had been cool. I was generally pleased with him as a doctor. The hospital on post also had a midwife whom I was not pleased with, because she was like this hippie white woman, and she was very comfortable. Like white people will assume a certain dialect, or like, what up, homie? Like, she would do that kind of shit when me and my husband would come into the office, and I would be like, do you talk to everybody like this? And she's like, I don't know what you mean. Bitch, yes you do. I think one time we walked into the office and she said exactly that. She was like, what up, homies? And I was like, hello, excuse me. And then she just had this stupid look on her face. But another thing that I didn't like about her is that she rarely would make eye contact with my husband. She very clearly had a problem with men, and she projected that shit onto me constantly. Like, she kept trying to reduce him to the sperm donor. She's like, am I right, Mom? You did all the hard stuff. He's just the sperm donor. Ha ha ha. And I'm like, no, that's not how we do things. We don't, not in this relationship anyway. I don't respect that. That's not, no, he's my husband and the father of this child, and you need to respect him as such and stop playing like it's anything other than what the fuck I just said it is. So that relationship didn't last, but my OB was generally pretty cool. Like, he was really straightforward, except about him going on vacation. But, when all things regarding pregnancy and the baby and stuff, he was cool. So now, fast forward to July, and I was experiencing some labor pains. I had started having contractions, but nothing too crazy. On the morning of the 11th at like 3 in the morning, I had started to feel some contractions, and I had a bit of a bloody show, or like my mucus plug had come out. For those of y'all that don't know, TMI, when the cervix starts to ripen and change size in preparation for birth, there is what's called the mucus plug that will likely come out, which is like a wad of mucus. That just kind of lets you know, like, hey, the things are changing inside the body in preparation for birth. Labor might be upon us. You may not go into active labor for another week or so, a couple days, maybe a couple hours. It's different for everybody, but this is just a sign. At the time, I didn't really know what the fuck it was, so I was like, what is that? So I called the nurse hotline and was just like, hey, explained what happened, and they were like, oh. And then they told me basically what I just told y'all, and was like, don't worry about it. So I'm like, all right, cool. This is at like 3:30 in the morning on the 11th. So I go about my business. I still have my daycare babies. They're ripping, running, bouncing off the walls, playing. We're doing what we normally do. And then I would have a contraction. Throughout the day, I was having them like every 9 to 11 minutes. Started at 11 minutes and gradually got down to 9. And they were really mild. Like, I never experienced painful contractions with my first daughter. I would say they were more uncomfortable, if anything, but very mild. So I'd be like, I'm having another one. Okay, y'all, sit down. Okay, cool. And then going about my business. So at 7 p.m. on the 11th, I am still timing my contractions. They're every 7 minutes apart. I'm taking a nice warm bath. I got some candles going. I'm playing some music. And I'm just vibing because I'm like, I want to labor at home for as long as possible. I don't like the hospital setting. We're going to, ride this out at home. Given the way the day's been going, I'll probably go in tomorrow morning. That's kind of where my head was at. Very calm, very cool. Not stressing about getting to the hospital at all. Mind you, I'm on a military base. The hospital is like a 10-minute walk, 2-minute drive. It's around the corner. I'm not tripping. So at like 7:30, I'm still soaking in my suds, minding my business. I get a phone call from the hospital, and it's the night nurse, and she's like, "Hi, I'm looking at the records for the day or whatever, and I see that you called in this morning, and I just want to see how things are going." And I'm like, "Yeah, I called, and I got the answer I needed, and I'm fine." The end. And she's like, "Oh, would you mind coming in so we can check you?" And I was like, "No, I really don't want to come in. I would like to labor at home for as long as possible. Is there any reason why I should come in?" And she's like, "Well, we just never know. We want to make sure that everything's okay. And if everything's okay, then it's great that you want to labor at home and you can just go right back home and do what you're doing." What the fuck are they calling me? Like, y'all ain't got nothing else to do? I was checking for people. So I'm like, all right, is this an emergency? Do I need to come now? I'm in the bathtub. She's like, "Well, no, take your time, eat some dinner, take a shower." Just said I'm in the tub. Eat some dinner, take a shower, pack a bag, and come in when you're ready. And I'm like, why am I packing a bag? I just said I don't want to be there. I want to labor at home. She's like, "Oh, we just want to be sure." So at this point, I know they on bullshit with me. I'm like, all right, man. I'm a go, but I'm gonna take my sweet ass time. So that was at like a 7:30. I told my husband, told him he ought to take a shower and get comfortable because I just felt like they was on dirt. So went to the store, got a watermelon, cut it up. I had a big ass bowl of watermelon. I'm like, all right, I'm gonna take this with me because I love watermelon. And it's a great way to stay hydrated while pregnant, especially in the summertime. It was 112 degrees that day. So I'm like, all right, cool. We get to the hospital around 11:30 at night. I come in. The very first thing they do is send a nurse to check my vagina, which is one thing that I don't like. Like, my midwives never did anything so invasive. I did not know that wasn't totally unnecessary practice, like to just stick their fingers up in there to see what's going on. You don't need to do that. There's so many other ways to determine labor in progress. But me being a first-time mom, I'm just like, all right, I guess that's what you do. Y'all want to check, see what's going on in there? Okay. So they check, and the first thing I noticed that I didn't like was how arbitrary this process is. In order to see how far dilated you are, they measure like their fingers. Like, the nurse is like, "Oh, if I can get these 4 fingers, that means you're probably 4 centimeters dilated. If I can get my whole hand in there, then you're fully faced." Like, I'm like, really? So what if somebody else with a different size hand does it? Then she's like, "Oh, well, it's different for everyone." And I'm like, why the fuck don't y'all have a tool so you can standardize this process? Like, y'all want to standardize everything about labor, but here we are, you checking, you say I'm 3 centimeters. This little short, stubby, fat finger motherfucker came over here and said that I was 1 centimeter, whatever, like, that was so crazy to me. But I'm going with it. I'm like, all right. So anyway, the results of that check was, "We need to admit you. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to let you leave." And I'm like, not going to be able to let me leave? Now I feel like I've been taken prisoner because I don't want to be here. And, this was the start of the bullshit. So the doctor that had been there all day came in, and it wasn't my doctor. He was still on vacation. And he came in and he's like, I'm getting ready to go home and get some sleep. It's about midnight at this point. So I'm getting ready to go home and get some sleep. I'll be back about 6 a.m. I need you to be at a 6 centimeters. I was at 4 centimeters at the time, by the way. It's like, I need you to be at 6 centimeters. I was like, well, we'll see what happens tonight. I don't know that my body's going to move that way. And we'll see what happens. And he was like, well, if you're not at 6 centimeters, then we're just going to schedule you for a C-section. I was like, what? Why are we even talking about a C-section? Like, isn't that an emergency only situation? Like, why are you so ready to schedule a C-section? I just got here. And he was like, well, we could talk about it in the morning, but it'll either be a C-section or we'll need to start you on Pitocin to induce labor. So now I'm feeling like some stress because I'm like why? Like, why are we, what? Like, I'm just feeling my guard come up. Like, all right, now I got to fight you because I'm not doing either one of those things. Fuck what you thought. But I'm like, okay. So not knowing how birth is a physiological event and the physiology that's involved with, inducing natural labor, I'm feeling a little angry. I'm feeling a little bit stressed. That's working against my body's natural processes in this time. But instead of getting rest, instead of eating, instead of relaxing, I'm like, I need to get to 6 centimeters because I don't want to deal with this in the morning. Like, I am not going on an operating table and I am not being induced because Pitocin is a synthetic form of oxytocin, and what it does is amplifies your contractions. I mean, it basically makes your body convulse. It gives you such intense contractions to bring about labor, to start labor, or to speed it up or make it more intense. But what a lot of doctors don't mention is that intensifies things way too rapidly and way too much for baby. Your body has a natural way of doing things, and every contraction that you have is like building you up for the marathon that is childbirth. And when they introduce Pitocin, it's like they want to skip from the 100, the 200, the 300 to just going to like a 400-yard dash. And it's like, whoa, I'm not conditioned for all of that just yet. I need to get ready. And then they'll offer the mother pain meds because her contractions are so intense. And so they'll give her an epidural. But baby doesn't experience that. So a lot of times babies go into distress. And not only that, the Pitocin doesn't pass the blood-brain barrier. So while you are having a natural labor, and oxytocin is being released, and then it's also like your brain is also aware of what's happening. Like in my other birth video, I talked about the theta band wave frequency and stuff like that. You don't get any of this when you're being induced for labor because you're just going from 0 to 100 real quick, and nothing in your body is aware of that other than so anyway, so I'm on the medicine ball all night. My husband trying different things. I'm trying different stretches and exercises, and I'm literally up on 4 a.m. I'm up oh shit, I have no idea how dilated I am, but I really hope I'm at a 6, and I'm stressing about this, and I'm doubting myself, and I'm like, what if I'm not doing it right? And just this is the headspace that I'm in. So 6:30 in the morning comes, the doctor comes in, snaps his glove on his hand like you see in the movies, and he's like, all right, let's see how you did. How I did. All of the language is just are you a total fuck up? Are you gonna get this right? Not just, hey, let's see what your body is doing at this time, because it's different for everybody, and no matter what's happening, it's okay. I didn't get any of that. It was let's see how you did. So goes to check, and I went from 4 to 5, and he was like, okay, well, you're not at a 6, so at this time we need to have some serious discussions, Mom. I can pencil you in for 12:30 today. I'm like, pencil me in for what? He's like, a C-section. And I'm like, why? So now we're arguing, because I'm like, but make it make sense. Explain to me why I need a C-section. And he's like, well, ultimately it comes down to you've been here too long for us to do nothing, and it looks bad on paperwork. We have to do something. And I'm like, no, the fuck we don't. We don't have to do anything. We can let nature take its course. I don't care what it says on paperwork. Like, I didn't even ask to be here. You called me in and put me on this clock. And now you're telling me that I'm moving too slow. Whereas now I understand for the kind of contractions that I was having, I may not have naturally gone into a labor for another week or so. But here we are. I'm arguing with him. I'm like, no, hell no. I'm not doing a C-section. Like, what, y'all gonna sedate me, strap me to the table, roll me into the operating room? I'm not going. No. So he gets an attitude and he leaves the room. And me and my husband are talking about this, and, you know, we're on the same page. He's just like, yeah, that's ridiculous. So I'm like, all right, nah, we're gonna have to figure something else out. So then he comes back in and he's like, all right, what I can offer you is that, you know, we do a slow drip of Pitocin and try to help you get things moving along. And I'm like, I don't really want what you're offering. And he has an attitude because he feels like, okay, well, I'm trying to work with you and you are just being non-compliant, like insubordinate, as if this is a military thing and he's my superior officer and I'm just not following orders. But it's like, this is a hospital. I am a laboring mother in the mother baby unit. You have the wrong fucking idea. Like, I'm not in the army, my baby's not in the army, you need to change it. But now the military base that I was on was a NTC, a National Training Center, and typically soldiers come there to train before going on deployment. And I really believe that this hospital also takes like all of their new doctors in for training before sending them elsewhere, because they were so incompetent and unprepared and just ignorant with so many things. Like, this whole Lotus birth thing was blowing their mind. None of them were aware and they were scared of it, and it showed, and it was like, whatever. So back to the doctor demanding that we start this Pitocin. I'm like, is there a chance that we introduce Pitocin and it makes my labor a living hell, but it still doesn't do what you want it to do, and therefore you will still have to schedule a C-section? And he was like, yeah, well, there is a chance of that. And I was like, okay, well, then I would rather skip that step and just give my body all of the possible time that I can to let nature take its course, and then we can do a C-section if that's what it comes to. And he was like, yeah, no, we need to do something right now. And I was like, well, that's all the give you're going to get from me. Like, I'm willing to schedule the C-section later today if it comes to it, but I'm not doing the Pitocin. Give me some time. So then he was like, you're starting to piss me off. What you talking to right now? But he was like, at this point, you are, what are the exact words he used? At this point, you are denying my medical advice, and at this point you are denying my medical advice, and you can get out of this hospital. So now he's kicking me out of the hospital. I'm 5 centimeters dilated. The nearest hospital from where we are is 3 hours, at least an hour of just driving through mountains before we get to the expressway. And then who's to say how long it'll take us with traffic? So I'm like, I'm gonna fuck around and have my baby in the car in the mountains with no cell service. This is ridiculous. Like, why would I leave? And he was just like, well, no, it's a liability. We couldn't let you leave. We would have to medevac you in a helicopter, but your husband couldn't come. So I'm like, that's not an option for me either, because he needs to be there. So no, that's stupid. That's what? And I'm like, just because I don't want to. He's like, well, it's not like we're forcing you. I'm giving you choices and you aren't choosing. And I'm like, I don't like either one of those choices. It's not much of a choice. What the but like, he got a real attitude and he's really upset, and like, I already told y'all, he raised his voice at me. So we're going back and forth, and I'm like, I don't like you. So he's pissed off. He leaves the room, and I never see this dude again. He does not come back. He was mad. So then some woman comes in, and she's like, listen, honey, I've had 4 kids. 2 of them were induced. 2 of them were natural. Trust me, it's gonna be fine. And I'm like, bitch, that was your experience and your prerogative. That ain't got nothing to do with me. I don't care. Next. Like, no, I'm still not going. So we're going back and forth, and they're telling me, like, okay, well, these are your options. We're gonna start this Pitocin, or we're gonna schedule a C-section. We'll give you about an hour to discuss it over with your partner, and then we're gonna come back and do one or the other. We recommend that you choose, but either way, we're gonna do one or the other in an hour. We'll leave y'all to discuss it. At this point, like, I am so upset and I'm feeling so bullied and manipulated and just like not empowered in the least bit, and sad, and I'm like crying, and I'm like, why is it this way? Like, why can't they just leave me alone? Like, I don't want to do this. I really don't want to do this. Like, I was real life scared of Pitocin because I had heard horror stories, and from what I read about it, it's just like, I know that this isn't gonna go well. I don't want to do this. I also recognize cesarean as a major surgery, and I'm like, this is not how I want to bring my new baby into the world, because although they can pencil me in on a chart for surgery and we can have a C-section scheduled and I know that it's coming, this life growing inside me does not. And here you are about to cut into me and snatch her from the triple darkness of my womb. And that is just, to me, not the way that I wanted her to go. Like, I wanted, it's a process. I wanted her to go through the birth canal and have that journey in her own right. So I was like, fuck a C-section. I don't want that for me or for her. And I don't want this Pitocin to turn labor into something that I can't handle, because I knew I wanted to labor naturally. And I'm like, I trust that I can deal with whatever my body dishes out, but if they start injecting me with synthetic hormones, I don't know what that's going to be like, and that intervention will likely lead to other interventions. I'll need an epidural or some other shit, and then who's to say what effect all of that is going to have on my baby? I don't want it. So I'm just so frustrated at this point, and just feeling so trapped and like, and then check my battery life real quick. I'm good. Okay. And I'm just so upset. But at this point, I have to make a decision. It's like the C-section, the Pitocin, or get the fuck out of the hospital. So I'm like, all right, well. Oh, and I also didn't want a C-section because the recovery process is so much longer. And I mean, it's major surgery. And I'm like, I don't want to go through that with the newborn. I expect it to be on my feet like 30 minutes after giving birth. Like, okay, cool, I'm up, I'm ready to go, and live my life. And I'm just like, that. It's not going to be that way with a C-section. So anyway, my husband and I have a decision to make. Ultimately, I decide the lesser of the three is the Pitocin. I'm like, well, at least that'll allow me to stay in this same area and give me some more time before C-section, like, to move things along. So I consent to the Pitocin drip. They start me, I don't know, one of my nurse friends tell me, I don't know what the measurement units are, whatever, but whatever, we'll call it milliliters for the sake of the story. They started me at a 2, so say they started me at like 2 milliliters, and within the hour they went up to 14. And once we hit 14, her heart rate started to drop, and she started to show signs of distress. And that was another thing. I was telling them, like, they kept saying that I was at risk for infection, and telling me about all of these apparent risks to like scare me into making one of these decisions. But I was like, okay, there's a risk that I could have got hit by a bus when I walked out of the house this morning. What's the probability that one of these risks are apparent? Like, they had me on monitors, they had her on monitors, they were constantly checking my temperature and my vitals and things of that nature. I'm like, I'm not showing any signs of an infection, and my baby isn't showing any signs of distress. So why are we pushing this, So anyway, so once we go up to 14 milliliters, she does start to show signs of distress. Her heart rate started to drop, and ultimately that was the reason why I had a C-section. They were like, okay, stat, we need to get a team in here, blah, blah. So it was a self-fulfilling prophecy, or a problem that they created and then swooped in to save the day. They caused her to go into distress and then came in and was like, we're going to save your baby. She's in distress. No, motherfucker, y'all put her there. Not doing me any favors, but whatever. So here we are. They send a surgical team into the room, and they're like prepping me for surgery and telling me what to expect from the C-section. And they're telling me that a lotus birth is not going to be an option because it could take up to an hour for the placenta to detach from the uterine wall, and they're going to need to take her immediately. And I was just like, here we go again. Hell no. Like, I already understand birth to be traumatic, not in a bad way, but just like, this is a major event, and now she's getting ready to come into this new world, and everything is sensory overload, from seeing these bright lights, hearing all of these sounds, having clothes on her skin, breathing air. I'll be damned if and then you're gonna cut me open and snatch her from her place of comfort that she clearly isn't ready to leave yet. I'll be damned if the first thing I let you do is cut her cord, which has been her source of nutrients and comfort, and like another, it's her other half in the womb. They literally share blood value. I'm just like, no, hell no. I refuse. If we're doing a C-section, we are doing this lotus birth. Like, that's not even something that I'm finna play with y'all about. So now I'm going back, I'm arguing with the fucking surgical staff, and these motherfuckers have the nerve to tell me, like, well, we're not gonna touch it. Talking about the placenta, they're not gonna touch it. Like, what? If this isn't unprofessional. And y'all, they didn't. Like, my husband did everything. Like, they stood over his shoulder and watched him as he cleaned the placenta, removed the blood clots, and like treated it. They wouldn't do anything, and the head surgeon is gonna ask him, like, did you go to school for this? He was like, nah, didn't you? Then she gonna shut the fuck up. Like, yeah, right. So anyway, so they wheel me in for C-section. As I'm leaving the room, because I had to get a spinal tap, which I'm unclear. One of my nurse friends, somebody tell me, is a spinal tap and an epidural the same thing? It was a needle in the lower of my back. I've seen someone get an epidural before. It looked like the same thing, but they called it a spinal tap and said it was to prepare me for the C-section. So they do the spinal tap, and immediately I started to feel like really nauseous. And so, you know how like you start to get like the watery jaws or whatever effect? I started feeling like, oh man, I think I'm gonna throw up. So I'm telling them like, yo, can somebody give me a bag or a basin or something? Like, I really feel like I'm gonna throw up. And then it went from feeling like I might throw up to knowing that I was about to throw up. Like, that shit was coming. So I was like, hey, excuse me, somebody give me something. I'm gonna throw up. So they go and they give me like this long blue bag, and I filled it up. Because mind you, they haven't been giving me food in the hospital in labor. You're not allowed to eat. I had only been on vegetable broth because I was vegetarian. And so I just threw all of that up. It just filled the bag up with liquids. And that's another thing that's a self-fulfilling prophecy, is like, in order to have a natural childbirth, you need the caloric intake of someone that is preparing to do like a 50-mile marathon. Yet, in the hospital, they want your stomach contents to be empty in the event that you go to surgery, so they don't give you food. But because you are malnourished, you don't have the energy or the stamina to do natural labor, and then you end up going to surgery. So, self-fulfilling prophecy. But anyway, so I throw up, and I'm like feeling gross, and I'm just like dizzy and nauseated, and I'm just laying there, and I'm like, I fucking hate this. I hate this so much. And we get to the operating room, and they put up the blue curtain, and it's all these bright lights, and I'm feeling really sick again. And at this point, my husband's not in there. They wouldn't let him come right away, I guess. They needed to set up first before he could come take his spot. But so I'm in there, and it's just me, and I'm yelling at them. I'm like, yo, I'm gonna throw up again. I feel it. It's coming. I'm gonna throw up again. And they are just moving and grooving like I am not fucking talking. And that was the scariest thing to me, because it's like, these people literally have my life in their hands, and they just can't hear me. Not that they can't hear me, they won't hear me. Like, they just choose not to. And I know that given all of the circumstances throughout it all, I was very coherent, very articulate, and able to talk to them the way I'm talking to y'all right now. And I would just get louder and louder, and they weren't saying shit. So finally my husband came in, and I was like, babe, I gotta throw up. And he was like, hey. And then they gonna get an attitude with him. And it's like, yes. And he was like, she needs to throw up. And we're in the operating room, so it's like all of these tools and equipment, like, just give me a bowl. Like, that's all I'm asking for. But whatever. I ended up throwing up and they hadn't got me anything, and it was in my hair and on my neck, and I was just like fucking disgusted with myself. And I was like, I do not want to meet my baby this way. Like, don't. My instruction had been to immediately place her on my chest. I wanted to do skin to skin before they did anything else. And at this point, I'm like, I don't even want to do that, because I'm fucking gross, and this is not how I wanted to meet my child. So I switched up the plan. I was like, we still need to do immediate skin to skin, but it needs to be with my husband until I can get cleaned up. When she comes out, make sure you hand her to him. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. make sure you hand her to him. And they're like, well, he can't take his shirt off in here and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, well, what? Go wherever the fuck he can and give her to him. Like, I don't want to argue about shit else at this point. So anyway, I threw up 3 times. That was the second time I threw up. And then the third time, my husband had made sure that I had something to throw up in. And I threw up, and I'm so sick and gross, and I feel weak and depleted. And I'm just like, ugh. So they start to do the C-section. And after, I don't know how long it had been, but I start to feel some pain. And so I'm like, okay. And it feels really hot, like searing hot. It's like, I don't know if you've ever like had a major injury, but it's like I felt heat before I felt pain. So I was like, as I'm starting to feel this searing heat feeling, I'm like, yo, I'm starting to feel pain. I'm trying to let them know, excuse me, hey, I'm starting to feel pain. And again, they're ignoring me. Like, this whole disparity in Black maternal health is so real due to implicit bias and institutionalized racism. They just act like they can't fucking hear us, y'all. Like, I was talking in plain English and they just couldn't hear me. They wouldn't hear me. So I'm like, I am starting to feel pain. I don't know why I'm feeling it, but could y'all please do something about it? And so, of course, the inherent narcissism that comes with the white coat, these motherfuckers is like, the anesthesiologist is like, there's no way I could have done something wrong. It must just be you. They're like, yeah, no, you're not feeling pain. Pressure is normal. And I'm like, excuse me. I know the difference between pressure and pain. I've been feeling pressure. I'm starting to feel pain. You need to do something before it gets worse. Exactly like that, word for word. So then they're like with an attitude, he adjusts my drip or whatever. And then eventually the pain that I had started to feel subsided, just went away. So it's like, why the fuck? Like, what? So this is so traumatic for me. I'm scared. And I'm like, I'm at these people's disposal. Like, they have my life in their hands and they don't give a fuck about me. Let's just call it what it is. So my daughter was born. Her placenta came out almost immediately, so we didn't have to worry about that whole situation. They did refuse to touch it, so my husband had to do everything. So the nurse was holding my daughter while my husband was cleaning the placenta, and then they brought her up to my head so that I could see her. And I'm just like, oh, hey, baby. And then I'm like, you need to give her to him. Like, immediately delegating, like, get your fucking hands off of her. I don't even know why you've been holding her for this long. You need to give her to him. Like, she needs to hear his voice and know that everything's okay, because I know that she doesn't know what the fuck just happened. My husband said she came out fighting, like, when they cut me open, and he was like, they were so rough, like, with the way they were tugging everything, and at one point, like, they put my stomach over here. He was like, they was just, like, tossing my organs around, and then they took her out, and she was like, she had her hands in front of her face, and she was, like, squaring up and shit, like, yo, what the fuck, get out of my ear. You know what I'm saying? And it makes me sad that she had to come into the world that way, you know, like, we were both fighting. And that's unfortunate. But anyway, so that's the C-section. And then my husband goes back to the mother baby suite or unit or whatever, and they're doing skin to skin, and he's bonding and getting to know her. And then I'm getting cleaned up, and they take me back into the room, and I'm so tired and so thirsty. I just remember being so thirsty, so tired, and so cold. I was like free. They kept putting heated blankets on me, and it was like I was just shivering, and I couldn't shake this chill that I had. So that was that. So that's the C-section. Now the pediatrician comes in, and he's like, about these vaccinations. So it's like, fuck, here go another fight. Now he's telling me, well, you know, I have X amount of children and they're all vaccinated. And I'm like, good for you. No. And again, I didn't know half of what I know now, but I just felt very strongly that I was right. So I was like, I'm not doing it. No. So he's like, I have some things that I want you to read. And I'm like, that's fine. And then this condescending piece of shit gonna hand me like some peer reviews and some journals. And he's like, now, you know, the wording might be a little difficult to get through and yada, yada, yada. I go to read these shits, and they're written in plain English. Like, I can understand it just fine. So now I'm insulted, because it's like, nigga, what, you thought I couldn't read? All right. But I read them, and I take it into consideration, but I'm still just like, no. To me, that's not a reason to poison my child. I trust that with her getting the stem cells from her cord blood and all the vital nutrients from her placenta, along with the 40 milliliters of blood from her placenta and the fact that she'll be exclusively breastfed and getting antibodies straight from me, that we don't need any of your synthetic bullshit because you won't be interrupting the process. So I'm just like, no, I'm good. I'm not explaining myself to him because I don't feel like I need to explain myself, but I'm just letting y'all know that that's why I was so confident. Like, no, we're good. So he thought that by providing me with some literature, he had just laid down the law and changed my mind. So when he came back in the room with his little tray of syringes, he was very disappointed to find out that I was still declining the vaccinations. So he got upset, got an attitude. A young, white, bald-headed dude was like, so obviously you didn't read it. And I was like, no, I read it. And then I applied it to the other information that I have. And I considered your expertise and what your job is. And then I considered my job as her mother. And then I made a decision. And my answer is still no. And he was so mad at me, y'all. He was like, this is absolutely ridiculous. And he was just like going in. He's like, you don't even know anything. You're just a first-time mom. And he kept saying first-time mom like it was a fucking insult. And I'm like, okay, I'm a first-time mom, but I've been married for 6 years. Like, I'm not a teenager in here with a baby that don't know shit about you know what I'm saying? Like, this wasn't an accident. This has been planned, and I know enough to know what I want to do. And ultimately, the decision isn't yours to make. You know what I'm saying? You asked me a question, I answered it in the discussion. It's magnesium and liquid chlorophyll. It kind of tastes like a plant. It's not that good, but it's helping me rebuild my blood. Anyway, so he's upset about me choosing not to vaccinate, and he's also upset that we did the Lotus birth, and he's just looking over and he's like, this is so unsanitary. He's just like, this is just an obvious risk of infection right here. And I'm like, what's even more of a risk of infection? The fact that I'm in this germ-ridden hospital. We'd have a much better chance of healing in peace at home. When can I leave? And given that he knew how I felt about getting out of the hospital, he started to use that as like leverage over me. So he would bring in some papers like, so have you thought any more about vaccinating? And I'm like, I already told you that we're not going to vaccinate. And he's like, well, you have to do vitamin K, and you have to do. And I'm like, I don't have to do shit, because according to the state of California, there is no law that says I have to vaccinate anything, so no. And he was just like, well, I'll keep you here for 10 days. First of all, they called me into the hospital, wouldn't let me leave, and now he's threatening to keep me here for 10 days. And I'm just like, for one, an extended stay isn't going to all of a sudden make me abandon my principles. So fuck you. If I have to be here for 10 days, then that's just what it is. Two, I don't think you can keep me here for 10 days. I had a normal delivery, like, it was a C-section, but there were no complications. I think the max is 3. So he's just like, yeah, well, we'll see about that. And then I didn't see him for a while. And I kept seeing this one nurse, but I wasn't seeing anybody else. And so I was just like, excuse me, where's that pediatrician with the bald head? Could you get him back in here? I want to talk to him. And she was like, oh, they're all in the meeting. And I was like, what meeting? And she's like, well, there's been an ethics meeting called on your behalf. And I'm like, an ethics meeting on my behalf? What are you talking about? And she's like, yeah, well, the hospital legal staff and all of the OBs and the majority of the nurses and just everybody from this floor are in this meeting determining your fates. Are you going to go home today? Who knows? Like, it's a fucking joke. And I'm like, how are they having an ethics meeting on my behalf and I'm not in the room? And she's like, oh, don't worry. We do this sort of thing and we do a great job of playing devil's advocate. And I'm like, they don't need to play devil's advocate, bitch. I'm sitting right here. Like, I can speak for myself. I don't trust that my interests are fully represented in that room. You got a bunch of people speaking to the choir talking about whether, I should be allowed to do this, but y'all all follow the same doctrine. So I need to be in the room. And she's like, oh my God. I've said too much. She runs out the room. Now I'm fucking blown, because I'm like, what? Like, they're here having this meeting. I didn't even know that there was a meeting. I'm in postpartum recovery. I had a baby yesterday. Like, what? So they have this meeting without me, and the bald-headed pediatrician comes back in to tell me that, let's see, this was, I think, Tuesday. She came in to tell me that they were going to let me go home on, like, Sunday. And he's like, how do you feel? My husband's like, how do I feel? I want to go home now. Like, you're not doing us any favors, you know what I'm saying? Like, he was, whatever. But when he came in to tell us that, he came in with some discharge papers for me. And he's like, I need you to sign these. So I'm looking it over, and I'm like, oh, hell no. Absolutely not. I was like, I will not put myself in a position where I'm no longer a patient of this hospital, and you can tell me that I need to go, but my daughter is a patient and she has to stay. Absolutely not. We came in here as a unit. We will leave as a unit. You give me some discharge papers for her, and then I'll even look at those. And he was just like, well, there's no way that we would do that. As long as there is, if there's an infant here, then a parent is, then, it's like the parent is admitted as well. You get to stay with them, and, you'll still have a room here, and blah, blah, blah. We just need to discharge you. And I was just like, fuck out my face. Like, nah, I'm not doing that. Nah, you all can go meet about that, because it's not happening. So he leaves with an attitude, and it is just like, every day that we've been there, everything has been a constant struggle, a constant fight. It's like every time somebody comes in the room, I gotta square up. Like, okay, now what? So I wasn't able to relax or just like fully bond with my baby, and just like from the moment I got there till after she was born, everything was a fight. Now, the first 24 hours were the roughest on us as far as like breastfeeding, and I was really stressed. And then on top of that, having a C-section, my body just wasn't up to speed with what had happened. And so it was taking my milk longer to come in than it should have. And that was stressing me out, because I knew it was because of the C-section. And then it was like those same feelings were coming back, and I was just upset all over again. And my husband was visibly frustrated, because like our daughter would just be screaming, and he's like, I can't do anything. Like, I can't, like, she wants milk and I don't produce milk. So he's frustrated with his inability, and I'm frustrated with the fact that my body isn't doing what it's supposed to do. I feel like it's letting me down in this moment, because my baby is hungry and my milk isn't coming in, and we're just having a really rough night. Now we finally get to sleep, and like maybe 4 or 5 in the morning we get to sleep. And I'm tripping on the timeline. Like, at this point, we've been in the hospital, I guess, for 2 days, because I was there the first night, and then she was born on that second day. And then this is the second night we're in the hospital, and then on the third morning. So we get to sleep at like maybe like 5 in the morning, and we are in a good deep sleep by like 9 o'clock. Like, double clutching, snuggling, we good, we comfortable. And I wake up to my daughter, and my daughter's in her little like bassinet thing on by my bed, like kind of, she's on the side of the bed but down towards like the foot of the bed. And I wake up to her screaming. So like I'm wiping the sleep out my eyes, and I'm like, yo, what the and first time I'm here, so now, you know what I'm saying, a baby wakes me up and I'm ready, because that's just what I do. But then it was just like, what just happened? Why is she hollering? Where's she at? What happened? What's going on? And there's some white woman in my room standing over my daughter like, hi, beautiful. Oh my gosh, isn't she just gorgeous? And I'm looking at this bitch, because I'm like, clearly you're scaring my child, and why are you in my room? Who let you in here? And I'm looking at her, and she's like, oh, Mom, good, you're awake. Talk to me about breastfeeding. How's it going? And I'm like grabbing shit off my nightstand and throwing it at my husband, trying to wake him up, because I'm like, we are under attack. Nigga, get up. And he wakes up, and she's like, glad both of you are up. My name's Peggy with the New Parent Help Association, whatever the fuck it's called. And I just have a small short film I want you to watch. And she pulls out a portable DVD player and begins to play this movie about shaken baby syndrome. She's some kind of advocate for the hospital. This bitch just woke us up to watch a DVD about shaking babies. And I'm like, the only person that gotta worry about me shaking something, you know? And I just can't believe like this total breach of privacy, and the fact that she has been allowed to come into our space and do this. I'm just like, if I were at home, this wouldn't be a fucking problem. Who is this person and why is she here? And who told you could come into my room? I don't give a fuck what you want me to watch. Like, if she had even asked me any questions, she would know that, like, I had extensive knowledge. I know that babies cry. I know what to do when they cry. Like, I've been a child care. I have owned my own daycare for some years now. Like, I know what to fucking do with kids. But no, it was none of that consideration for myself. It was just, this is what I want. Allow me to impose it on you, just like the rest of these medical professionals had been doing since I got to the hospital. And I'm pissed off, and I'm just like, nah, I decline all services, get out. So she's like, oh, well, you have to sign this form. And I'm like, whatever. And I'm looking at the form, and the way that it is worded in such a way of me basically saying I understand, like, basically saying that I feel unfit to be a parent, and leaving my contact information so that they can come do a home visit after I go home just to check up on things. And I'm like, there's no way in hell I will put something like this in my file. Like, no, I'm not signing shit. You get out of my face. Like, I don't even know why you're in here. Like, no. So I refuse to sign. So then Peggy Sue has an attitude. She snatches up her paperwork, and her little she had gave us like a care package of like marketing materials. Like, it was a pen with their organization name on it, and a little squishy stress ball, and like some other shit. And she took all of that shit, and I'm like, whatever, bitch, I don't want it. I don't even know who told you to come in here in the first place. So she took all of that stuff, and then she leaves out, and then the nurse comes in, and I'm like, why was she allowed to disturb our sleep? Like, in order for me to be a mother in postpartum recovery, you would think that y'all would take my healing process a little more serious. Why was she allowed to be in here? And they were like, oh, that's just Peggy. That's what she does. She makes her rounds every morning. And I'm just like, I can't wait to go home. I'm like, can I go home today? I feel great. Can I go home? And they're like, well, no, we have to keep you, unfortunately, for observation. All because we did the Lotus birth, we didn't cut the cord, and we didn't do the vaccines, and this was like completely unheard of to them, and they were just scared. So they were like, no, we need to see how this thing plays out. And I think, mostly curious, because they had never seen it. And you know how they like to do with black people. They were just like, oh, this is a case study. So I'm like, oh, okay, well, you can get the fuck out. Like, so then that happened, and then like the next day they came in and was like, so talk to me about your plans with the placenta. What are you planning to do? And I'm like, I'm gonna take it home. And they were like, oh, well, you can't leave the hospital with it. And I'm like, the fuck I can't. I birthed it just like I birthed my daughter. It's mine. It's not yours to keep. I'm taking it. And they were like, oh no, well, you can't. And I was like, oh, is there a policy in place that says that I can't take it? I'd like to read it, please. And they're like, well, we're actually in the process of making a policy about this right now. And I was like, okay, well, you done fucked up in telling me that, because you can't implement a policy right now and then try to enforce it right now. Like, whatever you write up is for here on out, but it doesn't apply to me. So you might as well get out of my face with this bullshit. And she's like, well, really, we just want to know what you're going to do with it. And I was like, it sounds a lot like you are wanting me to get your permission, and I don't need it. And I've already told you, it's none of your business. I'm going to do what I do with it once it detaches from my daughter, but it needs to detach from my daughter first. And so they were like, well, you're going to have to sign a waiver and carry it out of here in a like a medical waste bag bucket situation with a seal on it. And I'm like, okay, whatever, as long as you know that I'm taking it with me, whatever. So they brought me like a waiver, and then she let her cord go on the 4th day. And my husband was sad. He was feeling so useful, like being able to do stuff. Like, there would be times where she would just be inconsolable. Like, I've nursed her, we've changed her, and she just woke up, she's rested, and she is just upset. And then he would change the dressing on her placenta and just like massage her placenta, and she would like just kind of sigh and settle into like a little content state. And it was like he had really, like, I didn't do anything with her placenta. He did everything from the moment she came out, literally from the moment she came out um, until it came off. And so he was sad. But for me, I was like, yes, this tells me that breastfeeding is finally going well. Like, at least she trusts me enough to be her source of nutrients, because her placenta has provided her nutrients all of this time, but now she trusts me enough to let it go. Like, she's adapting to her new world. It was a totally different feel for me. I'm like, yes, she's my baby, first milestone. So she let it go at 4 days, and the nurse came in, and she was so shocked. She was like, I cannot believe how much the cord dried out, because it goes from being this like jelly cord that's like this, hella moist and just kind of like jiggly, to like really thinning out and being like really crispy, hard, dry. And then it just kind of detaches from her belly button like a healed scab, like the way once the skin heals under a scab, the scab will just fall off. That's how the cord falls off, and the belly button is completely healed. And she couldn't believe it, because in her experience, she had only ever seen instances where the cord had been clamped and it was like this little jelly stump, and it took about 2 weeks for that to come off. And even then, the belly button wouldn't always be fully healed. So she was just like, this is amazing. So you didn't do anything? You just left it alone? And I'm like, yeah, I just let nature do what the fuck it does. And look at that. 4 days later, she's good to go. Like, we could submerge her in a tub of water. She could take a bath if we needed to. Like, whatever. It took 4 days. And with this baby, it only took a day and a half. And I think that's because we were at home. And, you know, it wasn't a stressful environment. But, yeah, so then her cord came off after 5 days. And ultimately, we were in the hospital for 6 or 7 days after having had a C-section. And that's because the pediatrician was trying to get us there for 10. But the legal staff had determined that was unethical. And they couldn't really keep us if they didn't have a reason. So I guess, and I don't know what the terms were, but I think it was like, as long as her placenta was attached, they could keep us there, because that was a medical reason for us to be there. And then after it did, they could keep us for a certain period for observation, just to see. So I fully realized that we were a part of some sort of case study for this institution. They were able to just kind of see it play out. And then, yeah, but it was like from the moment I got there to the moment I left, everything was a fight. And then they required us to, so on the day that we are finally leaving and we're getting all of our shit together, they like needed to inspect the car seat before we could leave. And we had like the infant insert in the car seat. And, cause you know, like they be so big and a little baby just be in there like all hella loose neck or whatever. And the insert is just to keep them upright and like without their head from being able to move around. And the nurse is just like, yeah, no, you're gonna have to take that out. And I'm like, why? That doesn't make any sense. And she's just like, and for me, I can typically go along with whatever if you can make it make sense. Like, give me the reasoning on why, and then if it makes sense to me, okay, you've won me over. But she was just like, yeah, no, you just can't have it in there. And I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't make any fucking sense. And so, but I'm trying to go home at this point. So I'm like, whatever. My husband is like, he's like, fuck it, babe. We'll take that shit out now and put it back in the car. And I'm like, you damn right. Fuck them. So we take it out. And her head is just wobbling. And I'm like, this is so stupid. Like, she looks uncomfortable. And you ever, like, you know, like put your chin into your chest? It's kind of hard to breathe like that. I'm annoyed. But I'm like, you know, we just need to make it to the parking lot. Then this heifer gets on the phone and won't discharge us because she's on the phone. And I'm like, how about you put them on hold and just sign us out real quick? But no, she's, you're going to have to wait, please. And I'm like, oh my God, I just want to go home. I can't wait to get the fuck out of this hospital. I'm never coming back. Like, all I want to do is go home. And then, so we have to wait for like an hour before we can actually leave. And then the bald-headed pediatrician comes in and he's like, yeah, so we'd like to see y'all for a 24-hour appointment. You know, you need to be back here at 9 a.m. tomorrow. And we didn't get discharged until 11 a.m. So I'm like, that's not even 24 hours. Give us a fucking break. We've been here for a week. Like, we need some time. And he's just like, well, you know, let's call it 9-ish. I know, you know, it might be hard to get out with the newborn, but, you know, 9, we expect to see you around 9-ish. And I'm like, what time is the appointment? Is it 9 or 9? 9 or not? You know what I'm saying? Like, tell me what the appointment time is and we'll be here. And then he's just like, okay, it's going to be 9, and you just need to know that if you don't make it, then we're gonna have to send the police to your house. And I'm like, what? My baby just got back, y'all. But yeah, so ultimately that was that, and it was crazy, and that is why I fought so hard to have the birth that I had this experience. It's been real. Y'all have a good night. I'll see y'all in the comments. Hey y'all, I am back because I left out a couple of parts to that first birth story because I had to cut it short, or not necessarily cut it short, but my daughter came home, and I had decided a while ago that I had to either stop telling this birth story in front of her or reframe the way that I tell the story, because it's always been so upsetting for me and such like a source of frustration and anger and resentment, and I just don't want her to connect her own feelings about her birth. Like, I don't want her to view it through my lens, and I don't want her to mistake my feelings about her birth to be about like how I felt about her coming into the world, because it's two totally separate things. But she's 2, so I have to be very careful and intentional about how I talk about her birth when I'm around her, which is why I cut the video short when she came home. But for those of y'all that were interested, I'm going through and I'm inviting the people that I think were watching the video last time. Yeah, okay, I think that's like everybody. Okay, and as always, if you miss it, if I invite you and you don't want to watch it, just go back to minding your business. And if you did want to see it and I didn't tag you or invite you, my apologies, but I'll post it to my page after the fact and you can get all caught up. So anyway, with that being said, yeah, so with my first birth story, I kind of told y'all about how I ended up in the hospital. I didn't want to go to the hospital. I mean, I didn't, I wasn't like, oh my goodness, y'all, I'm in labor, I need to get to the hospital, I'm terrified. Like, no, I was at home chilling, minding my business, and they called me and asked me to come in. And from that time, it was just like a nightmare. So once I got there, they put me on this clock. They allow women to labor for 12 hours, and if you don't perform in that allotted amount of time, they will demand that you do some sort of intervention, like start Pitocin, which is a synthetic form of oxytocin, which makes labor nearly unbearable for most women, or schedule a C-section, major surgery. I didn't want to do either. I'm like, no, so I was fighting them on that. But anyway, so the first doctor that I told y'all about that got so angry he left the room and never came back and sent in like the good cop or the good doctor or whatever. This guy, when he was first checking me to see how far dilated I was, he had these, and I explained how they do this, like even in 2019 or at the time 2017, they don't have a standard way of checking dilation. Like, it's really this method of like, oh, well, if I can fit 2 fingers, then you're probably 1 to 2 centimeters dilated, and if I could fit 3 fingers, and then if I can fit my whole hand in there, then that's how I know you're fully dilated. Or maybe it's both hands, I don't know, I don't remember. But I was just like, that would be different for every person who checks depending on the size of their hand. Why don't y'all have a tool to use so that you can standardize this? Like, y'all want to standardize labor, y'all worried about the wrong stuff. But so this short, chunky, stubby-fingered person was checking to see how far dilated I was, and his fingers looked like little sausages. Like, he was one of those people with small hands, and they were fat, and it was like, So anyway, he was hurting me as he's pushing his fingers up in my hoo-ha. So I'm like backing up, like running up the table trying to get away from him. And he's like, be still, stop moving. And I'm like, this is really uncomfortable. And he was like, well, it's because of your people's pelvises. What? And this man insisted and maintained that because I was black, and he assumed Nigerian. At what point he kept calling me Nigerian, and I had to tell him, like, at one point in history, a very unpleasant part of history was y'all going over to the continent and stealing people. And unfortunately, I don't really know where I come from. I wish I did, but and he kind of like that made him uncomfortable. He kind of snickered and was like, "Oh yeah, that was weird, something stupid like that." But then he continued to refer to me as Nigerian and tell me that us Nigerians have these very narrow pelvises, and that was my problem, and I needed to be still so he could do his job, as he tried to cram his hand up my vagina. Very uncomfortable, very awkward, and despite me telling him how uncomfortable it was, he justified it by just saying, well, it's just you, it's you and your people, and this is, and retrospect, this informs me like why he was already had his mind made up that I was going to have a C-section, because in his preconceived notion, us Nigerians can't deliver babies vaginally because our pelvises are too narrow. I don't know where he got this pseudoscience, but he was so sure. And I'm like, first of all, don't you know we have been birthing babies since the beginning of time, since before birth in hospitals was a thing? But I digress. That was his claim to whatever. Secondly, fast forward through the story, I have the C-section after the big fight and being threatened to be kicked out of the hospital and all of that stuff. The bald-headed pediatrician is in my face again, and he's upset because I'm refusing to vaccinate. And I'm just like, no, like, I'm not going to let y'all poison my child. Get out of my face. But, having intellectual conversation with him, like, I even tried to meet him halfway. I'm like, listen, I understand that it's your job as a Western practitioner of medicine that you have to do what you believe to be best for all children that come through your practice. And you have to understand that it's my job as a parent to do what's best for my one. So, for instance, you recommend vitamin K for all babies across the board. It's a blood coagulant. It causes the blood to thicken. What do you think newborns are doing where they might bleed out? You know what I'm saying? Like, it really should be for male babies who are going to have circumcision. They're going to have a major surgery, and you don't want them to bleed out. And so now you need to introduce the synthetic form of vitamin K, because we naturally produce it after about 8 days of life. So I'm like, and I don't think she'll be doing anything within the first 8 days, although I can see why you recommend it for some, and to be safe, because everything's about liability, you recommend it across the board. But for me and mine, it's not necessary, especially because we did a lotus birth. So, and then furthermore, into the inside of that, there are stem cells in the cord blood, and it's normal and completely natural for babies to undergo some trauma when they're traveling through the birth canal. Sometimes there's a little bit of bleeding in the brain. There's some other thing. My daughter had shoulder dystocia, so she may have had some problems, but the stem cells in the cord blood serve a purpose. They travel up the spine and go to the parts of the body to repair the damages that are done during birth. It is a very natural process. The power that made the body heals the body. But doctors, in all of their inherent narcissism and intellectual ignorance, will argue that, well, the vitamin K doesn't start until day 8, and we need to do it right after birth because terrible things can happen between now and then. And then they push the fear and everything. So he's arguing that I need to do vitamin K, and I'm maintaining that I'm not going to. Vitamin K has a black box label, which is like the most dangerous warning label on a drug, or administered by the FDA or whatever. But whatever. So we're going back and forth about that, and then he stands up. For one, I don't like when I'm having a conversation with somebody sitting down and then they stand up to like look over me. It's like, sit the fuck down. Why are you getting big right now? Like, you're changing the playing field, because mind you, I'm in a hospital bed and I've just undergone major surgery, so me standing up is not an option. But you've taken the conversation from here to this, and I don't like that. Secondly, his tone changed and he got a little loud. Sir, are you trying to intimidate me? I don't like that. And then thirdly, this man fixed his lips to say, and I quote, between me and the Army, we own this baby. We've been very accommodating of you, but it's time for you to be quiet. What? He told me he owned my baby that I just birthed out of my body. And not only that, he told me he had been very accommodating of me. And I'm just like, as if you have been doing me a favor. I am a mother in a mother-baby unit. You are doing your effing job, okay? Like, at this point, I'm like, I have to get out of here safely. I need to get home because I see all the stories of the medical kidnappings where, I'm like, I have to be cool, because if I give them any reason to think that I'm crazy or, irrational, then they're just gonna file some papers and try to take my child from me. And so this whole experience, I have been scared for my life, scared for the life of my child, and now I'm scared that I'm gonna lose custody because I'm dealing with these loony bins in this hospital. And one of the craziest things is, like, I've always kind of felt like, it must really suck to be a sane person that gets admitted into an insane asylum, because trying to prove that you're not crazy has to be one of the hardest things. And I was trying to prevent myself from being in a situation like that, where I am talking to all of these white coats and these professionals and these hospital and medical staff and personnel, and trying to convince them that, no, I'm not crazy. Y'all are literally have been attacking me since I got here, and now you're attacking my child. You're trying to discharge me without discharging her, and just all kinds of nonsense. So, like, that just added to the mental anguish and turmoil that I was experiencing. And they also put, like, I think it's called, like, heart to heart or something. They have these little ankle monitors on the baby's ankles, and they say it's for safety, like, to prevent your child from being kidnapped. But we were the only people on the medical, what is it called, the mother-baby unit. We were the only couple that was there, which is another reason, like, well, I don't know why they were rushing me. I guess they knew that they had other mothers that were due at this time, and they expected to need the bed space that I was occupying. But when I was in labor, they were rushing me, but we were the only ones there. But mind you, they have this little ankle monitor on the baby, but to me, it didn't feel so much like it was for our protection as it was to keep us from taking our daughter out of the hospital without their explicit permission. Because several times throughout the night, like, they would come in and do vital checks every 2 hours, and that would piss me off, because it's like, we are just trying to settle in to our routine. I'm us figuring out breastfeeding, and we're establishing this nursing relationship, and now I finally got her to sleep, and she's resting, and she's all swaddled up and warm, and then every 2 hours you're coming in here, disturbing the peace, unwrapping her, putting this cold ass stethoscope on her. Like, if I had to tell the nurse one more time, like, if you don't, oh my bad, come back. I'm like, if you don't warm up the stethoscope before you put it on her, like, it takes you 2 seconds to just, put it up against your hand, your palm, rub it or whatever. Like, do you not work in pediatrics? Do you not work with children? Stop putting that cold ass stethoscope on my brand new baby. But anyway, she would come in to check, and then my oldest daughter would start screaming and crying. Now she's upset because she was asleep, and then you just frightened her with this cold stethoscope and woke her up and disturbed the peace and all of that. But they would do this every 2 hours, and then in between these 2-hour checks, somebody might come in the room and be like, oh, hey, I noticed that her ankle monitor, like, a little ding when a bell went off in the nurse's station, and they would just come to be like, her ankle monitor is loose, I'm gonna have to come in and tighten that. And I'd be like, get out. Like, you can do that at the next 2-hour checkup, okay? You're not about to do that now. Like, is she on parole? Is she on house arrest? Who gives a fuck if it's loose? Fix it the next chance you get. Now's not the time. We're not disturbing her again. No. So again, just everything was hella hostile and, like, upsetting. And then what else happened about that stupid ankle monitor? And then them wanting to check it every 2 hours. And I told y'all about how the lady came in the room and woke us up about the shaken baby syndrome DVD. Blew me. Like, why are you even allowed in my room? What is going on right now? It was insanity, y'all. It was so crazy. But I vowed that like I could not have another child until we are able to do things totally different. Like I will not put myself back in that situation, back in the hands of these psychos. I'm like, absolutely not, because it was something else, I tell you. Between them holding us hostage, refusing to let us leave because we wouldn't vaccinate, trying to tell us that we couldn't take the placenta, even though I birthed it. They were like, you can't take it. Then they tried to put policies in place while we were there and tried to implement those policies against us. And I'm like, no, that's not how this works. You can't do that. That's unconstitutional, if you will, ex post facto. And just, yeah. And then we finally did leave, not letting us use the infant car seat insert. And and then trying to force me onto birth control. So I absolutely refused birth control. And they were saying, well, you really don't want to get pregnant too soon, so you need to take this. And I was like, no, I'm good. I've been married for 6 years. This is my first child. I know how to not have a baby. I'm good. I don't do birth control. And these people brought me like some painkillers. Like I think they were giving me Percocet, some kind of muscle relaxer. I don't remember what it was called. And then a little birth control pill. And they brought me like a little cup and some water to take these pills. And I'm just like, what are these? And they were like, oh, these are your pain meds for the C-section. And I was just like, okay, what is it? So she's like, oh, that one's Percocet, that one's whatever the muscle relaxer is, and I'm not sure what this one is. And I'm like, well, you can take it, or I'd like to know what it is before I take it. And she's like, oh, I see here in your chart, yeah, it's birth control. And I'm like, I've already told y'all that I'm not taking birth control. And she was like, oh, well, we strongly recommend our new mothers to take it. And I'm like, I don't care what you recommend. I've already told you that I'm not going to do it. And she's like, well, we already prescribed it. And I was like, well, send it back. She's like, but your name is already on the bottle. I'm like, well, send it back. I don't give a fuck. Like, what? And then it's just mind-blowing to me that they were trying so hard to get me on birth control before I even left the hospital. Like, damn, let my hormones have a chance to regulate. I just had a baby. Like, it was just crazy. Everything about that experience was insane. Yeah, it's crazy. Oh, and then I think I left off in that last video telling y'all how the doctor was telling me that we had to come back for a 24-hour checkup appointment for our daughter, or he was going to call the police and send them to our house. So I was like, I'm very dissatisfied with the service I've received here in this institution. What if I were to just decide to take her somewhere else to do this 24-hour checkup? And this the bald-headed pediatrician was like, well, I would need to verify that she did indeed see another pediatrician. And I was like, oh, okay, how would you do that? He's like, well, I would need you to have a form filled out and signed to bring it back to me. And I was like, oh, okay, and who would I bring it to exactly? Would I bring it to you? And he was like, yeah, you would bring it to me. And I'm like, really? Like, that's part of your job? You get the fuck out of here. Like, no, it isn't. But just, again, that inherent narcissism of being like, yeah, you going to verify with me if you go anywhere else. No. But I told y'all we were like 3 hours from the nearest hospital. So we were discharged at 11 a.m. and then they wanted us to come back at 9 a.m. And I was like, that's not even 24 hours. Give us a break. We started to argue. He was like, well, I could call the police and send them to your house in the morning if you're not here by 9 a.m. So we were like, all right. Scheduled the appointment. And then in between the time we left and the appointment time, I called the appointment hotline, like an 888 number, to reschedule with a different doctor, but at the same hospital. I was just like, I never want to see his bald-headed ass again. And so when we went in the next morning, we saw a nurse practitioner. We didn't even see a doctor. And then, like, that appointment was cool, but I still had such a sour taste in my mouth. So we went to that appointment, and then I think we went to the 2-week appointment, and then we never took her back there. I was just like, yeah, no, we're good. And then we've since moved to a completely different part of California, and we are no longer in that area. So it worked out. Trying to make sure I'm not forgetting any of the pieces, because I'm not doing another video for this story. But I think between this one and the last one, I pretty much covered everything, all of the, and again, this was over 2 years ago, and at the time, I was so much more emotionally wrapped up into the story. You know how, like, if you talk about something that, you know, a situation that angers you, if you talk about it the day it happened, it's so much more vivid and detailed than if you talk about it a couple years later. That's kind of how this is, especially after having my last birth experience, and it was so healing and transformative, and that's why I think I can even talk about this birth story now, because it's like, through birthing my second daughter, I really just let that experience go. It's like, it was not what it should have been. And I was talking to my grandmother the other day, or yesterday, and watching these videos was her first time hearing the story, and she was telling me, she was just like so in shock, and she was like, I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I didn't know that, you know, y'all had went through that. And I was telling her, like, it was so crazy to me that because this was my first baby and my first experience with birth in a hospital and everything, I knew it was bad, but I didn't know it was that bad. Like, I didn't know how crazy it was until after I had like a point of reference and something to compare it to. And it's also sad to me that, like, I volunteer with this organization called Her Health First, and we deal with a lot of like young expecting mothers and people in underserved communities and stuff. But what I've learned is that this is a really similar experience for people. Like, when I tell my story, it's not unique. People are like, oh yeah, I dealt with that too, I had the same, yeah. And it's like, it is crazy that they treat us this way. That is not okay, and it is not normal, and that is not what it should be. But yeah, y'all, we gotta know better so that we can do better and demand better for ourselves and hold these institutions to a higher standard. My littlest love is getting up. All right, y'all, that's it. That's part 2. Be well. I'll talk to y'all. Peace.